Most people don't fail because they are lazy. They fail because their days slip away without intention. Hours disappear into distractions, obligations, and noise, and at the end of the week they feel tired but unchanged. If that sounds familiar, it's not because you lack talent or intelligence. It's because no one ever taught you how powerful one focused hour can be when it is used with discipline instead of hope. There was a time in my own life when I consumed endless content about growth. I listened, I read, I took notes, and I felt inspired. But nothing around me actually changed. My confidence stayed fragile. My goals stayed unfinished, and slowly, trust in myself began to fade. The turning point didn't come from motivation. It came from a quiet decision to give 1 hour a day a higher standard than the rest of my time. And that hour wasn't dramatic. No perfect routine, no heroic mornings. Just a simple agreement with myself. When this hour begins, I show up. I don't negotiate with my mood. I don't wait to feel ready. I work on one thing that moves my life forward, even if it feels boring, uncomfortable, or small. Over time, that single hour started doing something unexpected. It rebuilt my self-respect. I've seen the same pattern repeat in people close to me. A friend overwhelmed by work who stopped trying to fix everything and committed to one focused hour at night. A family member who felt stuck for years, then quietly used 1 hour a day to build a skill without telling anyone. A colleague who wasn't the most talented in the room, but became the most consistent. None of them changed overnight, but all of them changed direction. This is what discipline really is. Not punishment, not intensity. Discipline is an agreement you keep even when no one is watching. It's choosing a standard over a feeling. It's understanding that your future isn't built in moments of excitement, but in ordinary hours used well. 1 hour a day may not sound impressive, but over weeks and months it reshapes how you think, how you act, and how you see yourself. Many people think change requires massive action, but real transformation is quieter. It begins when you decide to respect your time instead of escaping from it. One disciplined hour creates structure in a chaotic mind, clarity in a distracted life, and momentum where there was hesitation. It teaches you patience, endurance, and honesty with yourself. Qualities no burst of motivation can ever replace. Then this is how progress becomes predictable, repeatable, and deeply personal. In the next hour, this audiobook will not try to hype you up or promise shortcuts. It will show you how 1 hour a day, used with intention, can change your relationship with time, effort, and self-trust. You'll hear real examples, simple principles, and practical ways to apply them in your own life. Nothing extreme, nothing unrealistic. Just a system you can actually keep if you're ready to stop waiting for motivation and start building a different life. 1 hour at a time. Stay with me. And if you know someone who feels stuck, overwhelmed, or quietly frustrated with where their life is going, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need to start improving their life today. Chapter 1. Why 1 hour is enough if you stop wasting it. Most people believe their problem is lack of time. They look at their days and see chaos, work, family, responsibilities, exhaustion, and they conclude that meaningful change requires more hours than they can possibly give. 5 hours, 10 hours, a completely different life. So they wait. And while they wait, nothing moves. The truth is harder to accept, but far more freeing. You don't need more time. You need 1 hour that actually belongs to you. An hour sounds small, almost insulting compared to the scale of the goals people carry in their heads. But that's exactly why it works. 1 hour doesn't trigger resistance. It doesn't feel overwhelming. It doesn't demand a new identity overnight. It simply asks one question. Can you show up for 60 minutes without escaping? Most people never really answer that question because most of their time is not wasted intentionally. It's wasted quietly. Minutes leak into phones, thoughts scatter between tasks. Energy gets drained by decisions that don't matter. By the end of the day, there's nothing left for the things that would actually move life forward. I learned this the slow way. For years, I told myself I was busy. I wasn't lying, but I wasn't telling the whole truth either. I was busy reacting, consuming, responding. I was not busy building. When I finally looked honestly at my days, I realized something uncomfortable. I could not point to a single uninterrupted hour that was fully mine. Every hour was fragmented, diluted, compromised. So I didn't try to change my whole schedule. I didn't wake up earlier. I didn't optimize my calendar. And I did something simpler and harder. I chose 1 hour and raised the standard for it. That hour had rules. No distractions, no multitasking, no just checking. I didn't care if the rest of the day was messy. That 1 hour was clean. And at first, it was uncomfortable. My mind looked for exits. It told me I was tired. It told me tomorrow would be better. It told me 1 hour wouldn't make a difference anyway. That voice is familiar to almost everyone. I saw the same resistance in a close friend of mine. He worked long days and had convinced himself that growth would have to wait for a better season. He didn't lack ambition. He lacked a boundary. When he finally committed to 1 hour in the evening, nothing dramatic happened at first. No motivation surge, no visible results. Just 60 quiet minutes with no one watching. 3 months later, something had shifted. His skill had improved, yes, but more importantly, his posture changed. He spoke differently. He trusted himself more. That single hour had become proof. Proof that progress didn't require perfect conditions. Proof that he could keep a promise to himself. This is what most people miss. 1 hour is not about productivity. It's about credibility. Every time you protect that hour, you send a signal to yourself. I take my future seriously. Over time, that signal compounds. The brain doesn't respond to grand plans. It responds to patterns. When you show up for one focused hour again and again, your mind starts to believe you. Resistance weakens. Doubt loses its authority. You no longer rely on motivation because you've built evidence. Another mistake people make is thinking the hour has to be heroic. They imagine intense effort, constant discipline, flawless execution. That fantasy is what keeps them stuck. The power of 1 hour comes from consistency, not intensity. It's better to work calmly for 60 minutes than to burn out for 3 days and disappear for 3 weeks. I once worked with a colleague who wasn't the most talented person in the room. In fact, he often admitted he felt behind. But he had one habit that set him apart. Every day, without exception, he protected 1 hour to work on the same skill. Not when he felt inspired, not when he had extra energy, just when the clock said it was time. 6 months later, the gap had closed. A year later, he was leading projects others thought he wasn't ready for. Nothing magical happened. No breakthrough moment. Just 1 hour, repeated enough times to become undeniable. This is why 1 hour is enough, because it bypasses excuses. You can't claim you don't have 1 hour, and once you remove that excuse, you're forced to face something deeper, whether you're willing to stop wasting it. Wasting time doesn't always look like laziness. Sometimes it looks like over-preparing. Sometimes it looks like consuming instead of creating. Sometimes it looks like jumping between tasks so you never fully confront the discomfort of focus. A disciplined hour exposes these habits quickly. There's nowhere to hide when the clock is running and the rules are clear. For the listener, the application is simple but not easy. Choose 1 hour. Fix it in place. Treat it as non-negotiable, not because you're strict, but because you respect yourself. Decide in advance what that hour is for. One priority, one direction, Not 10 goals. Not vague improvement. One thing that matters. When that hour begins, don't ask how you feel. Ask what the next small action is. Start there. Stay there. Let boredom show up. Let resistance speak. You don't have to fight it. You just don't obey it. Over weeks, something subtle happens. The hour stops feeling heavy. It becomes familiar. Then it becomes expected. Eventually, it becomes part of who you are. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who is trying to change. You become someone who shows up. This is why 1 hour works when everything else fails. And it doesn't demand a new life. It builds one, quietly, patiently, brick by brick. If you've felt overwhelmed by the idea of change, this is your entry point. Not tomorrow, not someday. 1 hour, chosen carefully, used deliberately, repeated honestly. That is more than enough to begin. Chapter 2. Discipline is an agreement, not a mood. Most people misunderstand discipline because they attach it to how they feel. On good days, discipline looks easy. Energy is high. Motivation shows up. The work flows. On bad days, discipline feels impossible, heavy, even unfair. So people conclude that discipline is something you either have or don't have, depending on your mood. That belief quietly ruins progress. Discipline is not a feeling, it is an agreement, and agreements don't change just because your emotions do. If discipline depended on mood, no one would ever build anything meaningful. Moods are unstable. They fluctuate with sleep, stress, weather, conversations, and random thoughts. If you let your feelings decide whether you show up, you hand control of your life to the most unreliable system you have. And I learned this lesson the hard way. There was a time when I genuinely believed I was disciplined because I showed up when I felt inspired. I worked intensely on the days when everything felt aligned. But the moment discomfort appeared, I negotiated. I postponed. I told myself I would get back to it when things felt right again. They rarely did. What changed everything was not more willpower. It was a shift in how I framed the commitment. I stopped asking myself whether I felt like doing the work. I treated my daily hour as an agreement already signed. The decision had been made earlier, when my mind was calm and clear. When the hour arrived, my job was not to decide, it was to execute. This is what discipline actually looks like in practice. You decide once, then you stop deciding. A family member of mine struggled with this for years. Smart, capable, full of plans, but always restarting. Every new attempt came with excitement and promises, followed by silence. Eventually, he admitted something most people avoid saying out loud. He didn't trust himself anymore. Not because he lacked ability, but because he kept breaking his own word. The shift came when he reduced everything to one agreement. 1 hour. Same time. Same purpose. No matter how the day went. At first, it felt mechanical, almost lifeless. But something important was happening underneath. Each time he showed up despite not wanting to, the agreement gained weight. It became real. Discipline works because it removes emotional debate. Debate drains energy. Agreements conserve it. Think about how you show up for other people. You don't wake up every day asking whether you feel like honoring your responsibilities. You show up because you gave your word. You understand that reliability matters. Discipline is simply applying that same standard inward. Most people avoid this because it feels restrictive. They confuse freedom with flexibility, but flexibility without structure becomes chaos. True freedom comes from knowing that certain things are already handled. When your daily hour is locked in by agreement, the rest of your day becomes lighter. You stop carrying the mental burden of should I and when will I. Another friend of mine described it perfectly. He said the agreement removed guilt from his life. Before, every skipped day created tension. He constantly felt behind. Once the agreement was in place, the rules were clear. Either he showed up or he broke his word. No confusion, no stories, just truth. And here's the part people rarely talk about. Discipline doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels neutral, sometimes boring, sometimes uncomfortable. Empowerment comes later as a result. You don't wait to feel strong before acting. You act until strength becomes familiar. This is why motivation fails so many people. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation asks, how do I feel today? Discipline asks, what did I already commit to? One creates inconsistency. The other creates momentum. If you want to apply this in your own life, the process is simple, but it requires honesty. First, write the agreement. Not in vague language. Be specific. 1 hour. 1 time. 1 purpose. This is not a wish. It's a standard. Second, remove negotiation. When the hour arrives, you don't assess your energy. You don't check your mood. You start. Even if you start slowly. Even if you start imperfectly. Starting is honoring the agreement. Third, expect resistance. Not as a sign of failure, but as proof you're doing something real. Resistance is just the old pattern defending itself. It fades when it realizes you're serious. Over time, something subtle but powerful happens. The agreement becomes part of your identity. You stop seeing discipline as effort. It becomes default behavior. The same way you don't debate brushing your teeth or showing up to work. You stop debating your hour. This identity shift is what people actually want when they chase discipline. They don't want to feel strict. They want to feel reliable. They want to trust themselves again. And trust is built one agreement at a time. There will be days when the hour feels heavy. Days when you question whether it's worth it. Days when progress seems invisible. On those days, discipline does its most important work. It carries you when emotion won't. It protects the agreement when motivation disappears. You don't need to be harsh with yourself. You don't need to force intensity. You only need to keep your word, quietly, consistently, without drama. That is the kind of discipline that changes a life, not because it feels powerful, but because it is dependable. Chapter 3. What you do in that hour matters more than the hour itself. Once people accept that 1 hour a day is enough, they often fall into a second trap. They protect the time, they show up consistently, but nothing seems to change. Weeks pass, effort is spent, and the quiet frustration returns. This is where many people quit. Not because the hour doesn't work, but because they are using it in the wrong way. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. Not all hours are equal. You can spend an hour every day and still go nowhere if that hour is filled with the wrong actions. Activity is not the same as progress. Staying busy is not the same as moving forward. And discipline without direction eventually becomes another form of avoidance. I've lived this mistake myself. For a long time, my disciplined hour was filled with consumption. Reading more articles, watching more videos, taking more notes. I felt productive because I was learning, but deep down, I was avoiding something harder. I was avoiding building, avoiding being seen, avoiding the possibility of doing something badly. That hour made me feel informed, but it did not make me stronger. The shift happened when I asked a question that changed everything. What would this hour look like if the goal was not comfort, but progress? The answer was obvious and frightening at the same time. Progress required output, something visible, something measurable, something that could be judged, even if only by myself. This is where most people struggle. Consumption feels safe. Creation feels risky. When you consume, you can tell yourself you're preparing. When you create, you face the reality of your current skill level, and that reality is rarely flattering at first. A friend of mine experienced this exact turning point. He had committed to his 1 hour faithfully, but after 2 months, he felt stuck. He told me, "I'm doing the time, but nothing's changing." When we looked closer, the pattern was clear. His hour was filled with planning, researching, and organizing, everything except the one action that would actually move him forward. When he changed one thing, using the hour to produce a small, imperfect output every day, the energy shifted almost immediately. Not because the work became easier, but because it became real. This is the core principle of this chapter. One disciplined hour only works when it is aimed at building, not consuming. Building doesn't have to mean something big. It means producing something that did not exist before the hour began. Like a page written, a skill practiced, a problem confronted, a draft completed. The size doesn't matter, the direction does. The brain responds differently to output. When you create, you engage feedback loops. You see where you're weak. You notice what needs improvement. You move from imagination to reality. And reality, while often uncomfortable, is where growth happens. Another common mistake is trying to do too much within the hour. People pack it with multiple goals, switching tasks, and fragmented attention. This creates the illusion of effort while diluting its impact. A focused hour should have one job, one direction, one priority. I worked with a colleague who transformed his results by applying this rule. Before, his hour was chaotic. Emails, planning, small tasks, and distractions bleeding in. Once he committed to using the hour for a single skill, his progress became visible. Not dramatic, not overnight, but steady, predictable, honest. This is why clarity matters more than intensity. When you know exactly what the hour is for, resistance has less room to negotiate. There's no debate. You sit down and work on the one thing you already decided matters. If you're listening to this and wondering how to choose the right focus, the answer is simpler than you think. Ask yourself, what action, repeated daily for 6 months, would change my situation the most? Not what feels impressive, not what feels urgent, what actually moves the needle. Then assign your hour to that action. There's another layer here that people often ignore. A disciplined hour is not meant to be inspirational. Some days it will feel boring, repetitive, but unrewarding. That is not a flaw. That is the design. Repetition is what turns effort into skill and intention into identity. I remember a period where my own hour felt dull for weeks. No breakthroughs, no excitement, just the same work day after day. The temptation to optimize or switch focus was strong, but I stayed. And slowly, without announcement, the work started to feel lighter, more natural. The progress I couldn't see earlier became obvious in hindsight. This is how compounding works. It hides while it's happening. 1 hour, used correctly, also teaches restraint. You learn to stop chasing novelty. You stop needing constant stimulation. You develop the ability to sit with a task until something gives. That ability is rare, and it is quietly powerful. For the listener, applying this chapter requires an honest audit. Look at how you currently use your focused time. Are you building or consuming? Are you producing or preparing? Are you confronting the thing that scares you or circling around it? There is nothing wrong with learning. Consumption has its place, but it cannot be the main event. Learning should support building, not replace it. A simple structure can help. Begin the hour by stating the output you intend to create. 1 sentence, clear and concrete. Then work only toward that outcome. When the hour ends, stop, even if you want to continue. This trains discipline and respect for the boundary. Over time, you'll notice something important. The quality of your hour improves your confidence, not because you feel inspired, but because you can point to real work done. Evidence replaces hope. Action replaces fantasy. This is why what you do in the hour matters more than the hour itself. Time is neutral. Direction gives it meaning. Discipline gives it power. One focused hour, aimed at building something real, repeated long enough, will change your life not by force, but by alignment. You stop pretending to grow and start actually becoming someone new. Chapter 4. The quiet power of doing it. When no one is watching, there is a kind of discipline that looks impressive from the outside. It's loud, it's visible, it announces itself early and often. And there is another kind that almost no one notices at first. It happens quietly, without witnesses, without validation, without applause. This second kind is the one that actually changes lives. Most people underestimate the power of working in silence because silence offers no immediate reward. No likes, no encouragement, no external pressure to continue. When no one is watching, the only thing that keeps you going is your agreement with yourself. And that is exactly why this stage matters so much. Early on, I made the mistake of sharing my goals too soon. I talked about what I planned to do, what I was building, where I was headed, and I thought it would help me stay accountable. In reality, it did the opposite. Talking gave me a false sense of progress. I felt rewarded before the work was done. And when the excitement faded, so did the effort. Silence changed that. When I stopped explaining myself, something unexpected happened. The work became cleaner. The hour felt more focused. There was no pressure to perform or impress, no identity to protect. Just the work exactly as it was. Imperfect, slow, honest. I've seen this pattern repeat in people around me. A close friend decided to stop announcing his plans entirely. No updates, no social posts, no conversations about what's coming next. He simply worked during his 1 hour every day and let the rest of the world stay unaware. Months later, the results spoke for him. And when people finally noticed, it felt earned. This is the quiet power most people never experience. When no one is watching, you stop acting and start becoming. There is a psychological reason silence works so well. When you share your intentions publicly, your brain often confuses recognition with achievement. You feel a sense of completion without having done the work. Silence removes that shortcut. It forces progress to come only from action. Doing the work quietly also removes comparison. When no one knows what you're building, you're less tempted to measure your progress against others. You stop asking, "Am I ahead?" or "Am I behind?" You focus on a simpler question: did I show up today? A colleague of mine learned this lesson after years of frustration. He constantly compared himself to peers who seemed to move faster and get more recognition. The comparison drained his energy. When he finally committed to working in silence, the mental noise disappeared. His 1 hour became lighter, not because the work was easier, but because it was no longer crowded with other people's timelines. Silence also protects fragile progress. In the early stages of change, confidence is still forming. Sharing too early exposes that confidence to doubt, opinions, and unnecessary feedback. Working quietly gives your discipline time to mature. By the time results become visible, they are harder to shake. This doesn't mean isolation or secrecy forever. It means understanding timing, results first, explanation later. There is another uncomfortable truth here. Many people like being seen trying more than they like doing the work. Trying earns sympathy. Doing requires patience. Silence removes sympathy and leaves only responsibility. And when you sit down for your hour and no one knows about it, there is no one to impress and no one to disappoint but yourself. That pressure is clean. It sharpens focus. It reveals character. I remember days when my hour felt especially heavy. No excitement, no visible progress. On those days, The temptation to seek reassurance was strong. To tell someone what I was working on, to get encouragement. Staying silent felt lonely at times, but it also felt honest. And honesty, repeated enough times, builds strength. A family member of mine went through a similar phase. He struggled with the urge to explain himself, especially when progress felt slow. Once he committed to 30 days of silence. No explaining, no justifying. Something shifted. He stopped negotiating with other people's expectations and started listening to his own. The work deepened. This is why doing it when no one is watching matters. It removes external motivation and replaces it with internal standards. You are no longer driven by how it looks, but by whether it is done. For the listener, applying this chapter requires restraint. Choose a period of time, 30, 60, or 90 days, where you do not announce your plans. Do not seek validation. Let your 1 hour exist quietly. If someone asks what you're working on, keep it simple. You don't owe anyone a detailed explanation. During this time, pay attention to what changes internally. Notice how your focus improves. Notice how comparison fades. Notice how discipline becomes more natural when it isn't on display. Silence also teaches patience. Without external feedback, progress can feel slow. That slowness is not a problem. It is training. It teaches you to trust the process rather than chase reassurance. It strengthens your ability to stay with something long enough for it to matter. There is a certain dignity that comes from quiet consistency. Not flashy, not dramatic, just reliable. Over time, that reliability becomes visible whether you announce it or not. Eventually, people will notice. They always do. But when they do, the conversation changes. Instead of asking about your plans, they ask about your results. Instead of offering advice, they ask how you did it. That shift only happens when the work has had time to compound in peace. Doing it when no one is watching is not about hiding. It's about protecting the process. It's about giving your discipline space to grow strong before it's tested by attention. If you can learn to value quiet progress over visible effort, your 1 hour a day becomes more powerful than most people realize. It becomes a private training ground where identity is forged, not performed. And when the time comes to step into the light, you won't need to explain much. The work will already have done the talking. Chapter 5. How 1 hour a day rebuilds self-trust. There is a quiet damage that accumulates when you repeatedly break promises to yourself. It doesn't show on the surface, but it shapes everything underneath. Confidence weakens. Decisions become hesitant. Even simple goals start to feel heavy. Over time, you stop believing yourself. Not because you lack ability, but because your words no longer carry weight. This is where discipline does its most important work. Most people think discipline is about control or achievement. In reality, its deepest function is rebuilding self-trust. When you show up for 1 hour a day, consistently and honestly, you're not just building a skill or habit. You're repairing a relationship with yourself. I didn't understand this at first. Early on, and I thought the value of my daily hour would come from what I produced. The writing, the work, the visible progress. But something else started changing long before the results became obvious. I began to trust my own word again. That trust had been damaged slowly. Every postponed plan, every "I'll start tomorrow," every agreement quietly abandoned. None of these moments felt dramatic on their own, but together they formed a pattern, and that pattern taught me a dangerous lesson, that my intentions were optional. The daily hour interrupted that lesson. At first, the change was subtle. I noticed I felt calmer, more grounded, less anxious about the future. Not because life was suddenly easier, but because I had one part of my day that was dependable. No matter what else happened, I could count on myself for that hour. A close friend once described the same experience in simple terms. He said, "For the first time in years, I'm not disappointed in myself at the end of the day." That sentence stayed with me. Self-trust doesn't come from big wins. It comes from ending the day knowing you did what you said you would do. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single heroic effort does not rebuild trust. In fact, it often makes things worse by creating unrealistic expectations. Trust is rebuilt through repetition, through small promises kept again and again. Every time you show up for your hour, you deposit something into an invisible account. It's not motivation, it's credibility. Over time, that account grows, and once it reaches a certain level, something important shifts. You stop arguing with yourself, you stop needing external pressure, and you start acting from a place of quiet confidence. I saw this transformation clearly in a family member who had struggled with follow-through for years. He was intelligent, capable, and full of ideas, but he carried a deep frustration with himself. When he committed to 1 hour a day, nothing about his life changed immediately. But his posture did. His voice steadied. He stopped over-explaining. He trusted his process. What changed wasn't his circumstances. It was his internal contract. Self-trust also changes how you handle setbacks. When you trust yourself, a missed day becomes a correction, not a collapse. You don't spiral into shame. You simply return to the agreement. Without self-trust, a single mistake feels like proof that you can't be relied on. This is why discipline should be measured by honesty, not perfection. That missing a day doesn't destroy trust, ignoring it does. When you acknowledge the miss and return the next day, trust strengthens instead of breaks. The daily hour teaches this skill naturally. It gives you repeated opportunities to recommit, to repair, to prove quietly that you are not defined by inconsistency, but by your willingness to return. Another powerful effect of self-trust is clarity. When you trust yourself, decisions become simpler. You don't overthink every choice. You don't look for constant reassurance. You know that even if a decision isn't perfect, you will handle it. That confidence doesn't come from certainty. It comes from reliability. I remember noticing this change in myself during a period of uncertainty. Big decisions felt less intimidating because I knew I could rely on my discipline. And the hour became a stabilizing force, a reminder that no matter what direction I chose, I had the capacity to follow through. For the listener, applying this chapter means shifting how you measure progress. Don't ask only what you produced. Ask whether you kept your word. Track your consistency, not just your output. Celebrate the act of showing up, especially on days when you didn't feel like it. A simple practice can help. At the end of each day, ask yourself one question. Did I honor my agreement today? Answer honestly. No judgment, just truth. Over time, this question becomes a mirror, and the reflection grows stronger. It's also important to keep the agreement realistic. Overpromising damages trust faster than underperforming. 1 hour is powerful because it is sustainable. It's an amount you can keep even on difficult days. That sustainability is what allows trust to compound. As self-trust rebuilds, something unexpected happens. You stop seeking motivation. You stop waiting for the right mood. You act because you believe in your own reliability. Discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like alignment. This is the quiet transformation most people never talk about. Before success shows on the outside, stability forms on the inside. Before confidence is visible, it becomes functional. You move differently, you speak differently, you plan differently. And it all starts with one simple, repeated experience. Doing what you said you would do. If you've ever felt disconnected from yourself, unsure whether to believe your own intentions, this is your way back. Not through self-criticism, not through pressure, but through a daily practice that restores trust 1 hour at a time. Over weeks and months, that trust becomes the foundation for everything else. Goals become believable. Effort becomes natural. The future feels less intimidating because you know you will meet it prepared. 1 hour a day doesn't just change what you do. It changes how you see yourself. And once self-trust is rebuilt, change stops feeling fragile. It becomes stable, grounded, and lasting. Chapter 6. Boredom, Resistance, and the Days You Want to Quit. There comes a point in every disciplined practice when the excitement disappears. The progress slows, the novelty fades, and what remains is something most people are not prepared for. Boredom. This is the stage where motivation no longer helps and identity has not fully formed yet. It is also the stage where most people quit. Not because the system doesn't work, but because it finally starts working. Boredom is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It is a sign that you've moved past stimulation and into repetition. And repetition is where real change is built. Unfortunately, repetition feels flat. It doesn't reward you emotionally. It doesn't make you feel special. It simply asks you to keep going. Resistance shows up alongside boredom. It whispers reasonable arguments. You've been consistent. You deserve a break. Missing one day won't matter. You can always come back tomorrow. These thoughts feel harmless, logical even, but they are the final defense of your old identity. I remember this phase clearly. There were weeks when my daily hour felt almost pointless. I wasn't learning anything new. I wasn't excited about the work. There was no emotional payoff, just the same task, the same structure, the same effort. Old versions of me would have taken that as a cue to change direction. This time I didn't, not because I was strong, but because I had learned something important. Boredom is not the enemy. Avoidance is. Most people are addicted to stimulation, not progress. They mistake feeling engaged for moving forward. When the engagement disappears, they assume something is wrong. In reality, boredom often means you are finally focused long enough for the brain to stop seeking novelty. A colleague of mine struggled deeply at this stage. After months of consistency, he told me he felt empty during his hour. No excitement, no sense of growth. He questioned whether he was wasting his time. The temptation to quit was strong, not out of frustration, but out of indifference. What saved him was a simple rule: do less, but don't stop. On the days when resistance was heavy, he reduced the effort but kept the structure. He didn't aim to perform well. He aimed to show up. That distinction made all the difference. This is one of the most important lessons of discipline. You're not required to feel productive. You're required to remain present. Progress does not demand intensity every day. It demands continuity. Resistance thrives on all or nothing thinking. If I can't do it well, I won't do it at all. Discipline breaks that pattern by lowering the bar without removing the agreement. You don't need to push harder. You need to stay. There will be days when your hour feels slow, days when your mind wanders, days when the work feels dull. Those days are not exceptions. They are part of the process. Learning to work through them quietly is what separates people who change from people who repeat. I once watched a family member go through this exact phase. He reached a point where every session felt like a chore. No visible progress, no satisfaction. He told me he felt like he was just going through the motions. And he was right, but those motions were shaping something deeper. Tolerance. Tolerance for discomfort. No tolerance for monotony. Tolerance for effort without reward. That tolerance became his advantage later. Another thing people misunderstand is the role of emotion. They assume discipline means suppressing how you feel. It doesn't. It means refusing to let feelings decide your actions. You can feel bored and still work. You can feel resistant and still show up. Emotion does not require obedience. This distinction is subtle but powerful. When you stop fighting boredom and allow it to exist, it loses control. It becomes background noise instead of a command. There is also a deeper fear hiding behind resistance. Fear that the effort won't pay off. Fear that you're investing time into something that won't change your life. That fear becomes louder when progress is invisible. But discipline is not built on guarantees. It's built on faith in process. Not blind faith, earned faith. Faith built from showing up enough times to know that momentum exists even when you can't feel it. For the listener, applying this chapter requires redefining success on difficult days. Success is not output, it's attendance. If you show up during boredom, you win. If you stay with the hour when resistance is loud, you strengthen something far more valuable than motivation. A practical strategy helps here. Decide in advance what your minimum looks like, not your ideal. Your minimum. On the hardest days, your only goal is to complete that minimum without judgment. This protects continuity without forcing intensity. Over time, something unexpected happens. The days you once dreaded become neutral, then manageable, then unremarkable. Resistance weakens not because it disappears, but because it stops working. This is also where many people experience a shift in self-respect. They realize they can endure discomfort without escaping. That realization changes how they approach challenges outside the hour. Life feels less overwhelming when you've practiced staying with something difficult daily. The days you want to quit are not obstacles. They are training grounds. They teach patience. They teach humility. They teach you that progress does not require excitement. If you can learn to stay when boredom tells you to leave, you gain a skill most people never develop. The ability to continue without emotional reward. And that skill compounds quietly and carries into every area of life. Discipline is not proven on the days you feel strong. It is proven on the days you feel indifferent. Those days decide whether the hour remains a habit or becomes a turning point. Stay with it. Lower the bar if you must. Slow down if you need to. But do not disappear. Because on the other side of boredom is something rare, quiet confidence. And once you develop that, quitting no longer feels like relief. It feels out of character. Chapter 7. Identity change. You don't do discipline, you become disciplined. Most people think discipline is something you do, a behavior you force, a habit you try to maintain, an action you repeat when you're strong enough. That belief keeps discipline fragile, because anything you do can be dropped the moment pressure, fatigue, or emotion shows up. Real change begins when discipline stops being an action and becomes an identity. This is the quiet shift that separates people who constantly restart from people who move forward steadily. They don't wake up every day deciding whether to be disciplined. They already see themselves as someone who shows up. The behavior follows naturally. At first, this idea can feel abstract. Identity sounds psychological, even theoretical. But in practice, identity is simply the story you believe about who you are and the evidence you collect to support it. Every repeated action is a vote for that story. For a long time, my identity was built around effort without consistency. I saw myself as someone who wanted to be disciplined, someone who tried to improve. That language mattered more than I realized. Wanting and trying placed discipline outside of me, like something I was chasing. The daily hour changed that story slowly. At first, nothing about my identity shifted. I still doubted myself. I still felt behind. But after weeks of showing up, something subtle happened. I stopped thinking of discipline as something separate from me. It was just what I did. That's when everything became easier, not because the work changed, but because resistance lost its leverage. And I saw this transformation clearly in a close friend who struggled with self-image for years. He often described himself as inconsistent, undisciplined, easily distracted. Those words weren't just observations, they were anchors. Every missed day reinforced the identity, every restart confirmed it. When he committed to 1 hour a day, the first change wasn't in results, it was in language. He stopped saying, "I'm trying to be disciplined." He started saying, "This is just part of my day." That shift marked the beginning of an identity rewrite. Identity doesn't change through affirmation, it changes through evidence. Every day you honor your hour, you collect proof. Proof that you are someone who keeps agreements. Proof that you can tolerate discomfort. Proof that you don't need motivation to act. Over time, and that evidence outweighs old stories. This is why discipline feels exhausting at first and natural later. In the beginning, your actions conflict with your identity. You feel like an imposter. Your mind looks for excuses because the new behavior doesn't match the old self-image. But if you persist, the identity updates to match the behavior, not the other way around. Once that happens, discipline stops feeling heavy. A family member of mine experienced this shift after months of quiet consistency. At some point, he realized he no longer needed reminders or tracking systems. The hour simply happened. Not because he was forcing himself, but because skipping it would have felt out of character. That is the real power of identity-based discipline. You don't rely on willpower, you rely on alignment. Once another important aspect of identity change is how you speak to yourself. Internal language matters. Saying, "I have to do this," reinforces resistance. Saying, "This is what I do," reinforces identity. The difference is subtle, but its impact compounds over time. When you identify as someone disciplined, you don't debate every action. You don't ask whether you're in the mood. You act the way a disciplined person acts, the same way an honest person tells the truth or a reliable person shows up. This doesn't mean perfection. Disciplined people still miss days, they still struggle. The difference is how they interpret those moments. A missed day isn't proof of failure, it's a deviation from identity. And deviations are corrected, not dramatized. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They turn mistakes into meaning. That one missed hour becomes "I'm inconsistent." One bad week becomes "I always fall off." Those conclusions freeze identity in the past. Discipline requires a different interpretation. I am disciplined, and today I return. Identity-based discipline also changes how you respond to boredom. When discipline is just an action, boredom feels like a reason to stop. When discipline is identity, boredom is irrelevant. You don't quit brushing your teeth because it's boring. You don't quit showing up to work because it's repetitive. You do it because it's who you are. I remember a phase where my daily hour felt completely uneventful. No progress spikes, no emotional reward, just repetition. Old versions of me would have taken that as a sign to change direction. This time I stayed, not out of force, but out of identity. I was no longer someone who quit just because something felt flat. That decision paid off later in ways I couldn't see at the time. For the listener, applying this chapter means shifting focus away from outcomes and towards self-definition. Start paying attention to how you describe yourself internally. Notice the labels you use. Then allow your daily hour to slowly challenge them. A simple practice can help. Before starting your hour, say one sentence quietly to yourself. I am the kind of person who shows up, not as a motivational trick, but as a reminder of what you are building evidence for. Then show up. Over time, the sentence stops feeling aspirational. It becomes descriptive. This is the moment when discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like integrity. You act in accordance with who you believe you are. And because identity is stable, your behavior becomes stable too. The most powerful changes in life don't come from intensity. They come from consistency aligned with identity. When you become disciplined rather than trying to be disciplined, progress becomes inevitable. You don't need to force the future. You just need to keep becoming the person who meets it prepared, 1 hour at a time. Chapter 8. 6 months of 1 hour a day. What actually changes? Most people imagine change as something dramatic, a clear turning point, a moment when everything feels different. 6 months of 1 hour a day rarely looks like that. In fact, the most important changes often go unnoticed while they are happening. They reveal themselves only when you look back and realize you are no longer the same person. This chapter is not about fantasy. It's about what actually changes when someone commits to 1 disciplined hour a day for 6 months, without shortcuts, without hype, and without quitting when it feels boring. The first thing that changes is not your results, it's your relationship with time. Time stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you direct. You no longer see days as something to survive. You see them as containers. One of those containers belongs to you, and you know exactly what it's for. People often underestimate how powerful this shift is. When you reclaim even 1 hour a day, you reclaim agency. You stop waiting for permission to improve your life. You stop blaming circumstances as often. Not because circumstances disappear, but because you've proven to yourself that progress can exist alongside them. A friend of mine noticed this shift around the 2nd month. He told me his days felt cleaner, not easier, just clearer. Even on stressful days, he felt less scattered because he knew one important thing had already been handled. The second change is mental. Your mind becomes quieter, not because you eliminate thoughts, but because you reduce internal conflict. Before the hour, your mind is full of unfinished intentions. You think about what you should be doing, what you're avoiding, what you'll start soon. That noise creates fatigue. When you show up daily, that noise fades. There is less guilt, less self-argument, less background tension. You're no longer carrying promises you don't intend to keep. This mental clarity alone is life-changing for many people. By the 3rd month, something deeper begins to take shape. Focus improves, not just during the hour, but throughout the day. You become more comfortable with sustained attention. Scrolling loses some of its grip. Distraction becomes easier to notice and easier to stop. I've seen this in colleagues who once struggled to stay with a task. After months of daily focus, they didn't become superhuman. They became calmer, more deliberate, less reactive, so their thinking slowed down in a good way. Around this time, results start to become visible, but not always in the way people expect. Skills sharpen, output increases, but more importantly, effort becomes efficient. You waste less energy deciding what to do. You move directly into action. A family member of mine experienced this shift clearly. After months of disciplined work, he didn't feel like he was trying anymore. He felt capable of handling complexity, capable of learning faster, capable of sticking with something long enough for it to matter. By month 4 and 5, emotional stability becomes noticeable. You're less thrown off by bad days, less dependent on mood, because you have evidence, real evidence, that you can function even when things feel off. That confidence doesn't come from success. It comes from reliability. This is also when many people experience a quiet pride. Not the loud kind that seeks recognition, but a steady sense of self-respect. You trust yourself. You don't need to prove anything. That internal stability affects how you speak, how you make decisions, and how you respond to pressure. Importantly, some things do not change in 6 months. Life doesn't become perfect. Challenges don't disappear. Motivation doesn't stay high. Anyone promising that is lying. Discipline doesn't remove difficulty. It changes how you relate to it. There will still be days when the hour feels heavy. Days when progress seems slow. But by this point, you understand something crucial. Progress doesn't announce itself daily. It reveals itself over time. One of the most dangerous mistakes people make is judging the process too early. 6 months of 1 hour a day is enough to change direction, not to finish the journey. It sets momentum, it establishes identity, it builds a foundation. By the 6th month, the most profound change is internal. You no longer see yourself as someone waiting to become better. You see yourself as someone already in motion. That shift changes everything. Goals stop feeling distant. They feel reachable because you trust the process that moves you toward them. For the listener, the application of this chapter is patience paired with honesty. Don't look for daily confirmation, look for monthly alignment. Ask yourself not, am I there yet? But, am I still showing up? Track your progress in simple ways. Not to pressure yourself, but to create perspective. When doubt shows up, as it will, look back at who you were 3 months ago. The difference will be clearer than you think. 6 months from now, you may not feel transformed in a cinematic way, but you will feel grounded, clearer, more capable, and those qualities matter more than excitement ever will. 1 hour a day doesn't change your life by force, it changes it by direction, and direction, maintained long enough, determines everything that follows. If you commit to the hour and allow it to work quietly, the changes will come. Not all at once, not loudly, but steadily, honestly, and in ways that last. This is what actually happens. And it's more than enough. As we reach the end of this audiobook, I want you to pause for a moment, not to analyze what you've heard, but to feel where you are right now. This was never meant to overwhelm you with ideas or push you into instant transformation. Everything you've listened to comes back to one simple truth. Your life doesn't change when you know more. It changes when you do one small thing consistently, with intention. We talked about why 1 hour a day is enough, not because it's impressive, but because it's honest. We reframed discipline as an agreement, not a mood, something you decide once and honor daily, even when motivation disappears. We explored how what you do in that hour matters more than the hour itself, and why building something real will always change you more than consuming more information. So you heard why working in silence is powerful, how showing up when no one is watching strengthens your character, and how discipline quietly rebuilds self-trust. We talked about boredom, resistance, and the days you want to quit. Not as obstacles, but as proof that the work is finally real. And we looked honestly at what happens after months of consistency. Not a perfect life, but a grounded one. A life where you trust yourself, focus better, and move forward without drama. None of this requires extreme effort. It requires honesty. It requires choosing 1 hour and treating it as non-negotiable. Not because you're strict, but because you respect your future. That hour doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to feel good. It just needs to exist. Now it's your turn. You don't need a full plan. You don't need clarity about the next year of your life. All you need is to decide when your hour will be tomorrow and what one small output you'll focus on. Decide it now, while your mind is calm. Then, when the time comes, begin. No negotiations, no overthinking, just presence. Some days, that hour will feel productive. Other days, it will feel slow and boring. Both are fine. Discipline isn't about how the hour feels. It's about the relationship you build with yourself by showing up anyway. Over time, that relationship becomes the foundation for everything else. Confidence, direction, and quiet strength. If you ever feel stuck again, come back to this idea. 1 hour, one agreement, one direction. You don't need to fix your whole life. You just need to stop abandoning yourself daily. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening with attention and honesty. If this audiobook helped you see your time or yourself more clearly, I'm grateful you're here. And if you know someone who feels overwhelmed, lost, or quietly disappointed with where their life is going, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear to start improving their life, 1 hour at a time. Take care of your time, keep your agreements, and I'll see you in the next video.